Namaste everyone. Welcome to the patrons only discussion of the Rigvedic people, invaders, immigrants, or indigenous. Today's discussion is going to be chapter 7, 8, and appendix 1. But before I have the discussion, I wanted to answer a couple of questions that were asked by Rajiv. So Rajiv writes, I'm in UK and I have a desire to come back to India to work there and contribute to the economy. And but I'm lately concerned about the law and order situation, women's safety, etc. compared to UK. And so I can't weigh the pros and cons properly. Since you've stayed in Canada and Mumbai, can you tell me the pros and cons? This is a personal decision, Rajiv. At the end of the day, you have the right answers for something like this. But I'm going to give my view. I always encourage people to leave India because I believe India has gone from bad to worse in terms of law and order. In some ways, where it is related to freedom of speech. In terms of overall safety, actually India is becoming safer and safer and safer and safer by the day. The law and order and the crime data actually indicates it. I'll give you an example. 2002 riots happened, 1100 people died. Riots happened in Delhi, hardly anybody died. So that shows that actually in terms of actual people dying, India is becoming safer. Having said that, I believe that India is a very frustrating place to live in. Now I've reached a point in my life where I've become very frustrated about everything. Why? I'll tell you why I became frustrated. Because I care. If you care, then India is very frustrating. If you don't care and you get into that mental zone where ignorance is bliss, I'm having my money, I have my maids, I have my driver, I have this awesome life where I live in my cocoon, then it's awesome. But honestly, I don't know. So you have to take your own call. Maybe your family situation is different. See, in my case, it was very clear my brother was not coming back. So I was like, if my parents are not going to come back and if even I'm going to stay there. And plus at that time, I think I liked living in India also. I had that chauvinistic, imaginary lifestyle, Bharat Mata ki Jai kind of an imaginary thing. But now I'm certainly not in that zone. I think I don't see myself dying in India, to be very honest. Will that happen? I don't know. Could happen. But if somebody was to ask me, do you see yourself dying in India? I don't see myself dying in India. I see myself dying in North America. The daily corruption, the daily grind over here, the daily struggle to be an honest person in India just gets to me. The only way I can see myself living in India, and that's why I can only answer for myself. I can't answer for you. That I think is not fair. The only way I can see myself living in India is if I quit my business. If I quit my business, then I don't have to face corruption. If I quit my business, then I don't have to face all the problems that businessmen face in India, that I face on a daily basis. To be very honest, I face them so much that it gets to a point that it's very frustrating. But yeah, so that's my answer. I can't answer for you. I don't like telling people what they should do with their lives. If I was you, I would not come back. That I'd say. I don't know what you're going to do. Then your second question was, I don't understand why Subramanian Swamy was not made finance minister. And also I like Arun Jaitley a lot. I think he's a better politician than Modi. But when I see demonetization and GST, I kind of think he was incapable. What is your stand on them? First of all, you have to understand, this is my understanding of Indian politics. Demonetization was not a Arun Jaitley decision. It was a Narendra Modi decision. It was not an economic decision. It was a political decision. It was taken keeping the UP elections I think the UP elections needed this because they basically drained everybody for their money. So that's what the strategy was. In hindsight, demonetization and क्या बोलते हैं इसको? GST, the combination has destroyed the economy. I still support GST and demonetization. I think demonetization should have been done and then GST should not have been rushed in. The economy did not get destroyed because of demon. The economy had recovered immediately after demon. It was a V-shaped recovery. What destroyed us was GST. That destroyed us. They should have waited at least one more year, make it stable, then get GST in. I think they rushed it in. It's okay, their choice, their life. I mean, we are facing the consequences. But what I'm really worried about is the way we are handling COVID right now. That I think is going to destroy the economy. As far as should Subramanian Swamy become the finance minister of India, I don't think so. Because when you are a politician, you're just not like a professor or a thinker who works in a silo. You have to be very, very careful in what you say. You can't have a loose cannon as a minister. Dr. Swami might be the brightest man alive when it comes to economics, where I disagree with him on many things, but I still think he's a fine economist. But the point is that's not good enough in politics. You can't be a loose cannon where you attack anyone and everyone and then you go around saying these things. I think that disqualifies him as a politician. Politicians can't be like that. And I hope that answers your questions. And I sincerely believe that if you have the opportunity of going on staying in UK, भाई वैसे भी तुम अभी क्यों वापस आना चाहते हो? Why do you want to come back now? यार कोविड में who the hell would want to come back in India where in such a high density of population you have to freaking go through COVID? Why would you want to come back right now? Just stay there. At least गोरों के देश में जगह तो है घूमने की. हमारे यहाँ तो जगह भी नहीं मिलती घूमने की. Ask me, I live in Mumbai. It's terrible. And you have no idea what's happening to the economy. The way we are doing this game of lockdown, mark my words, the economy is going to be destroyed. And mark my words, there will be, for the first time, you'll see people beating cops up, beating government officials up if they don't fix this damn shit. At the end of the day, yes, every life matters, but if something has a mortality rate of 0.5%, which is the reality of COVID, or even less than that, it's a damn shame that we've locked things down even right now. I'm sorry to say that. If that is the case, if every life matters, then, shut the whole country down, because tuberculosis also spreads and many other diseases happen. You drive on the road, somebody runs you over, cars should not be allowed. What if we die? There should be no potholes or manholes or gutters, because what if I drive, I'm walking on the street and I'll fall in the gutter and I'll die? So these arguments are not fair, and I would not sincerely advise you to come back to India right now. But if you have a family emergency, I completely understand. I know many people who sail in that boat who have to come back, because you know what, a man's got to do what a man's got to do, or a woman's got to do what a woman's got to do. At the end of the day, family is the most important thing in life. And yeah, even I am in India because my parents want to live in India at the end of the day. And there is not even a single day where I don't try to convince them ki chalo, I can move to Canada, you can go to America, and we can live a decent life. They're like, no, we don't want to go there. And I'm not leaving India till my parents don't want to leave India, that's for sure. So I hope that answers your questions, Rajiv. And I am answering it after I took your permission, albeit it was a personal question, but I hope it satisfies you. And I'm sorry if it doesn't satisfy you, because man, I don't have a better answer than this. I am just as good as this. All right, let's get started. Chapter 7, the civilization in the Saraswati vis-a-vis the Rigveda. In the previous chapter, we dealt with the evolution of the civilization in the Saraswati basin. We would now like to ascertain as to who exactly the people who produced this remarkable civilization. As mentioned earlier in page 41, the Saraswati was a much eulogized river during the Rigvedic times. It was regarded as Ambitame, that is the best of mothers, and Naditame, that is the best of rivers, and Devitame, that is the best of goddesses. According to Rigveda, there lived many peoples in the Saraswati basin, and many a king ruled there. For example, verse 661.12. Now, I'm not going to read the Sanskrit verse itself, because we can go through faster. If you want, I can share the verses on the screen so that at least you guys have an idea, right? Okay, let me do that. So this is the verse he's talking about. Okay. Anyway, the verse 661.12 states that she, the Saraswati, was the promoter of the 5 peoples, but does not specify the names. However, verse Rigveda 796.2 says, specifically does mention the Purus. Even the rulers are sometimes mentioned by name. For example, 795.2 mentions the name of Nahusha. Or Rigveda 8:21-18 not only refers to a king named Chitra, but mentions that there were other rulers as well, though of lesser importance. Now, I want to state here, I think B.B. Lal is relying on Griffith from what we remember. Bibliography mein, we had clarified this the last time also, but I just want to check up again. Yeah, it's basically Griffith is the translation. It is a 1995 Griffith reprint, the hymns of the Rigveda. That's what he's relying on when it comes to the translation. I have not seen anything else in the bibliography when it comes to the Rigveda. So B.B. Lal's source of the translation, before somebody asked this question, what is his source, is Griffith. Okay. Or 8:21:18 not only refers to a king named Chitra, but mentions that there were other rulers as well, though of lesser importance. There are many more examples of the kind, but even the few quoted above should suffice to convince the reader that according to the descriptions given in the Rigveda, the Saraswati basin was bustling with activities, with peoples inhabiting it and kings ruling over them. This picture would have straightaway established a correlation between the cultural remains unearthed in the Saraswati basin referred to in the preceding chapter and the textual descriptions in the Rigveda. Unfortunately, however, the date 1200 BCE assigned to the Vedas by Max Muller in the 19th century has always been the greatest stumbling block. In spite of the fact that Max Muller himself retracted it, a few scholars even today tenaciously cling on to this date. If you are watching this video, I would recommend that the explanation of how Max Muller came up to this date has been already covered in chapter 1 in the introduction. Also, if you watch the Talagiri videos, he has given Max Muller's dating method in far more detail, and we have covered all of them in the previous videos. I'm just reminding you guys that a lot of times what happens is some new patron comes up and that patron has not checked the last videos, and then they keep on wondering ye kya bol raha hai. So all these things are already explained just for your information. It is therefore imperative to re-examine the date of the Rigveda. In determining the date of the Rigveda, the history of the river Saraswati plays a very important role. As already noted, the Saraswati was a mighty flowing river during the Rigvedic times. However, the Panchavimsha Brahmana says, at a distance of journey of 40 days on horseback from the spot where the Saraswati is lost in the sands of the desert, is situated Plaksha Prashravana. He's using Kalin's translation 1931. While it may not be easy to identify correctly the location of Plaksha Prashavana, it is nevertheless clear that the Saraswati had dried up before the time of the Panchavimsha Brahmana. However, this text does not tell us when exactly this drying up took place. We have, therefore, to look for evidence from other sources in this regard. And here geology, hydrology, archaeology, and radiocarbon method of dating all put together come to our help. I'm going to put figure 7.1 on the screen. All right, here we go. In chapter 5, we cited the fieldwork carried out by two eminent geologists, V.M.K. Puri and B.C. Verma, which showed that the Saraswati originated from the Himalayan glaciers and moving southwestwards cut across the Shivaliks to descend on the plains. In the course of further fieldwork, these scholars have found out that because of tectonic movements that came up the Bhatta-Markanda divide, which is nearly 30 meters in height, as you see on 7.1. This is, let me try to make the image full screen by F11. I'm sorry, I forgot to make it full screen. Okay. Can I make it larger? Let me try, even on full screen. Let me try. Aha. This is far better. Okay, in chapter 5 we saw which showed the Saraswati originated from the Himalayan glaciers, moving southwestwards, cut across the Shivaliks to descend on the plains. In the course of further fieldwork, these scholars have found out that because of tectonic movements that came up the Bhatta-Markanda divide, which is nearly 30 meters in height, which is shown in figure 7.1, it blocked the path of the Saraswati, which could no longer flow westwards. It had perforce to reverse its direction, and finding the Yamuna tear opening it had to perforce to reverse its direction, and finding the Yamuna tear opening on the southeast, took to a new course and joined the Yamuna. Thus ended the glorious story of the mighty Rigvedic Saraswati. But when exactly did the tectonic demon stood in the way of Saraswati following its old course and lose its identity? The geologists have not yet provided us with a firm date. However, here the evidence of other sciences, namely hydrology, archaeology, and carbon-14 method of dating the past is very significant. In the 1960s, we were carrying out excavations at Kalibangan. An opportunity was taken to investigate the history of the now dry Saraswati on whose bank the site is situated. A team of Indian and Italian hydrologists under the leadership of Robert Rijks bored several holes in the bed of the river. After a thorough analysis of the data, Rijks published a paper in Antiquity, 1968, entitled Kalibangan Death from Natural Causes. And the cause of the death was the drying up of the river, according to radiocarbon dates. The settlement of the Kalibangan had to be abandoned around 2000 to 1900 BCE. In other words, the Saraswati dried up around 2000 BCE. Since during the days of the Rigveda and the Saraswati was a mighty flowing river, it becomes self-evident that the Rigveda is anterior to 2000 BCE. How much earlier is anybody's guess? At least a third millennium BCE horizon is indicated. Further, the Rigveda consists of 10 mandalas, of which numbers 637 are acknowledged on all hands to be the earliest. It is thus not unlikely that the earliest mandalas may not have been composed sometime in the 4th millennia BCE, if not earlier. Now, something I want to add, again, this is just a reminder for people that might be wondering what is this 637 business, because I observed, I think Amol is on Patreon for the first time. So Amol, there is something called the internal chronology of the Rigveda. You will have to watch all the videos of Shrikant Tadagiri where he goes on and explains the internal chronology of the Rigveda. As per the Rigveda, there is something called the old books and the new books. So I'm not going to sit here and explain the whole thing. But basically, Rigveda was written over a period of many years, like 1,000+ years. So there are certain mandalas that are called the older mandalas, and there are certain mandalas that are called the newer mandalas. So that's what B.V. Lal is trying to say, because I know there is a new patron here. That's why I'm trying to explain these things so that the person does not go abba dabba jabba, like what the hell is Kushal talking about or reading. So this is just being done because I see a new patron on the live chat today. Extending the canvas beyond the Saraswati basin, we find that the Rigveda gives a very good idea of the territory occupied by the Rigvedic people. Verses 5 and 6 of Sukta 75 of Mandala 10 refer to the entire area lying between the Ganga Yamuna on the east and the Indus and its western tributaries on the west as follows. And I'm not going to read the verse, but if you want to see the verse on the screen, this is the verse that he's talking about. I'm just going to read the English translation. O Ganga, Yamuna, Saraswati, Shutudri, which is Satlaj, and Parushni Ravi, O Maruvridha, and with Askini Chenab, O Arjikia, with Vitashta Jhelam, and Sushoma Sohan. Please listen to and accept this hymn of mine. O Sindhu, flowing you first meet the Trishtama, and then the Susartu, the Rasa, and the Shweta, and thereafter the Kubha, the Gomati, the Krumu, and Krumu with Mehatnu, and finally you move on in the same chariot with them, that is, carry their waters with you. Now, a forthright question may be asked. Archaeologically, which culture occupied this very area during the 3rd, 4th millennium BCE? That is, during the time of the Rigveda. The inescapable answer will have to be the Harappan, also the Indus Saraswati civilization. In other words, the Vedas and Harappan civilization are but two faces of the same coin. See figure 7.2. This is a horribly written book, but this is 7.2. I had to go back to a page. Further, in chapter 6, we saw the roots of this civilization go back to 6th and 5th millennia BCE. In other words, it was indigenous, since, as we have just seen, this civilization and the Vedas are but two faces of the same coin. The Vedic people were indigenous. They were neither invaders nor immigrants. How long shall we continue to blindfold ourselves? So I just wanted to read a comment on the post. Brushal, was this about this chapter or the next chapter? I think about the next chapter, right?
It was about the appendix.
Yeah. So yeah, I was just confused. I don't know if I didn't read your comment, so I was just asking. It's about the appendix, right? Okay. So we can go on to this chapter was pretty straightforward. Anybody has any comments? I think it's a pretty straightforward chapter. I think that if we were to how do I put it? If you want to understand what B.V. Lal says in this chapter, which is pretty much the internal chronology of the Rigveda, also about the science, I think the geology part we have covered. Danino's book, which covers the geological data far more in detail. If you want to look at the complete analysis of the Vedic suktas and the Vedic hymns, I think Tadagiri has done an amazingly detailed analysis in that, and believe me, we have covered every word of it. And as far as the internal chronology, again, Tadagiri has covered that. So I think this chapter, this book, to be very honest, as we had mentioned it in the start of the discussion, this book is like a summary of everything that we have done in the past 4 books, if you ask me. I don't know. What is your opinion, Karthik? Don't you think this book is like a good summary of what we've been discussing in the past?
Yes, I mean, so there's many different ways in which this sort of discourse is handled. It's very good in the sense that it's quick and easily digestible. It may not be easily defensible in the same way. So we have this kind of, between all the people who are arguing for OIT, or at least against Aryan invasion, there's a big spectrum, right? So we have people like Danino who are extra careful, and he'll like keep like the same. Basically, what's in this chapter would have been in 5 chapters of Danino, right? He would have really gone into all the different arguments. Like, he would have not just stopped at Robert Reichs, and he would have gone into various other digs, and then he would not have just stopped at Puri and Verma. He would have talked about the French group that went and did found some other thing about Shivaliks. Like, he is much more thorough and he's much more circumspect. Whereas this book is pretty much like, this is how it was, take it or leave it. And and then of course on the other extreme of the BB Lal side, I think BB Lal is a good midpoint, because he's forceful, but he doesn't say anything that he can't back up with evidence. And of course, on the far side of that are people who are forceful, and then they say things like Rigveda was 10,000 BCE and so on.
No.
There's no
20,000. By 20,000.
So, based on one piece of interpretive evidence. So it's like there's a big stretch of things, and I think BB Lal is a good. I mean, this is a great book, honestly, for the beginner with AIT, except for chapter 6, which is just, if it was better organized, it would have been much better. Like,
Imagine I read the whole chapter.
Yeah, you read the whole thing out loud. That was just, I mean, that's also got good information, but it presents it in a way that is completely indigestible. Other than that, everything in this book so far, and even the next chapter, which we'll come to, is written almost as a summary. That it's a good way for people that it's almost like it's sort of an antidote to your ICSE textbook. It can be understood even by someone who's in 10th or 11th. Has just regurgitated that ICSE nonsense. Now he reads this, at least they're set on the right track. So
just in case, again, anybody wonders where does this 20,000 BC date comes from, it is coming from Nilesh Neelkantok, and you guys can happily follow his work. I've read it and I totally disagree with it, and my reason is that there is no current evidence that proves that. That's all. Anyways, let's go to chapter 8, which is basically 2 pages. I'm just going to read it out. It is called In Retrospect and Prospects. What we have discussed in the previous chapters may be summarized as follows. 1. The Aryan invasion of the Indian subcontinent is a total myth. 2. Equally mythical is the postulate that the Aryans were immigrants, if not invaders. 3. The Rigvedic river Saraswati is not the Helmand of Afghanistan, but it is to be identified with a now dry river, which is known as the Saraswati Ghaggar, combined in the Haryana and Rajasthan regions of India, the Hakra in Cholistan and Nara in Sindh, both the latter regions being in Pakistan. 4. In the basin of this Saraswati, there evolved a remarkable civilization. To begin with, the people dwelled in pits in the 5th millennium BCE and progressed through various stages to reach a high civilization level of civilization when they built fortified cities in the 3rd millennium BCE. 5th, the Saraswati has been referred to many times in the Rigveda and was regarded by the people as the most sacred of all the rivers. This river dried up around 2000 BCE, as shown by the evidence of hydrology, geology, archaeology, and radiocarbon method of dating. Hence, the Rigveda has got to be earlier than 2000 BCE. How much earlier is anybody's guess, but at least 3rd millennium BCE horizon is clear. Some of the mandalas of the Rigveda are known to be very early, and hence these may well go back to the 4th, 5th millennium BCE. 6. Thus, taking into consideration the 2 very important parameters, namely those of region and chronological horizon, it is self-evident that the civilization that prevailed in the Saraswati Valley from the 5th millennium BCE to the 3rd millennium BCE is indeed that of the Rigvedic people. 7. From what has been stated in number 6 above, it becomes absolutely clear that the Rigvedic people are neither invaders nor immigrants but indigenous. But this is not the end of our search. We would like to be like it to be continued further, and following are a few suggestions in this context. 1. The pit dwellers of Bhirana and Kunal are already in the Copper Age. What were their antecedents? Any Mesolithic, Microlithic horizon? To get an answer, one must thoroughly explore the neighboring regions, particularly the area along the Shivalik foothills. The exploration must be followed by excavations at selected sites. 2. In the Cholistan region, excavations ought to be carried out at suitable sites in order to find out what preceded the Hakra ware culture. Do the microliths met with at these sites constitute a separate and earlier horizon? 3. Ganeriwala in Cholistan appears to be one of the largest sites of stage 4 in the cultural evolution in the Saraswati Valley. A large-scale horizontal excavation at this site is bound to throw further valuable light on this stage. I appeal to the Archaeological Survey of India and other archaeological institutions in India to seriously take up suggestion 1 at the earliest. Likewise, I hope that suggestions 2 and 3 will not go unnoticed by the Department of Archaeology, Government of Pakistan, and other archaeological institutions in that country. Though I am past 92 now, I would patiently wait for my appeal to be heard and acted upon by the powers that be. So just a comment on part 1. I think part 1 we've had partial success. The man is 99 years old, by the way, right now. Bibi Lal Saab. Part 2 and part 3, though, he's been totally disappointed because Pakistan has done literally nothing. I mean, it's just unbelievable. This is the tragedy of India, Pakistan. I mean, chalo Pakistan se to ummeed nahi hai, magar what the hell are we doing in India, yaar? I mean, we don't do anything. Even with Rakhi Gadi and Sanoli, these things should have been discovered 20 years ago. What we discovered in Sanoli, what we discovered in Rakhi Gadi, what we've discovered in many other areas. This should have been discovered 20 years ago. But to be very honest, it's just a disappointment. Anybody else has a comment? Rushal, Devayan, Karthik, Anita, Manasa, anybody wants to add? Because, I mean, these were just blind conclusions. Anybody wants to add here, or can I go forward? Okay, I'm assuming nobody wants to add something. I'll just move forward. And now, luckily, today's session is not going to be that long because last time my throat was like, ugh, that chapter was too long. But I powered through it. Today's session is going to be ending faster, which is good for my throat at least. So now we're going to be covering Appendix 1. Did some Vedic people emigrate westwards out of India? The answer to the above mentioned question is an unhesitating yes. It comes from 3 completely independent areas, 2 of which are separated from each other by thousands of kilometers, while the third one lies in between them. These areas are Turkey in the west, India in the east, and Iran in the middle. Turkey has yielded incontrovertible inscriptional evidence about the presence of Aryans in that region at least as far as back as the 14th century BCE. The entire community of historians and archaeologists was struck with surprise when in the first decade of 20th century, Hugo Winkler discovered in his excavations at Bogaskoy certain inscribed clay tablets on which was recorded a treaty between a Mitanni king named Matiwaza and a Hittite king Supiluluima, ascribable to circa 1380 BCE. As witnesses to this treaty, the 2 rulers invoked the following Vedic gods: Indra, Mitras, Vedic Mitra, Nasatya, Vedic Nasatya, and Uruvanas, Vedic Varuna. And the treaty is only a chip of the large block. From this region and its neighborhood, more than 100 names have come to light, which have a Sanskrit stamp on them, such as the Biridaswa, Vedic Vridhaswa, Uruditi, a Hurrian king, which is Uruditi, Arthasumara, another Mitanni king, Ritasmara, in addition to Mativaza, Mativaja, already mentioned, and so on. The context of some of these names goes back to the 17th century BCE. Then there is another remarkable document. It deals with the technique of horse training and mentions Sanskrit numerals like Ekavartana, Trivartana, etc., meaning thereby that the horse under training should be made to make 1 round, 3 rounds, and so on of the race course. Though the foregoing data are enough to establish the presence of Vedic Aryans in ancient Turkey, there is yet another kind of... I just want to make a point here that honestly, if you were to just merely read this, and I don't know what the other people think, it could well be made, the case could be made for the Aryan invasion theory also. To understand why this case is not enough to make a case for out of India is that until and unless you don't understand that the internal chronology of the Rigveda, which Talagiri has shown, and then you compare it with the Avesta, and then you compare the two, and then you come up and try to understand why this matters, is only when you'll get that, okay, it is east to west, not west to east. Because merely reading this paragraph, anybody who has got half a brain will be like, why can't this be a case for an Aryan invasion? If you find evidence in Turkey, and you find the similar things in India, it could well be that those were the gods and they came here. Now you might come back and answer, but in the same book we have said that the date is 3000 BCE, but those people say the date is wrong. They say the date is 1500 BCE, if you remember. So you have to be very careful when you read this book video. That's why I say go back and read and watch all the old videos. Until you don't understand the internal chronology of the Rigveda, all of this will go bouncer over your head. Though the foregoing data are enough to establish the presence of Vedic Aryans in ancient Turkey, there is yet another kind of evidence to which attention may be drawn. In the Mitannian art dating at least to the 16th to 17th century BCE, perhaps even to 2100 BCE, there is a portrayal of a peacock, a bird typical of India. This couldn't have been the case unless Indians were behind the inspiration. Commenting on the Bogaskoy evidence, the renowned Indologist T. Burrow observed, the Aryans appear in the Mitanni from around 1500 BC as the ruling dynasty, which means that they must have entered the country as conquerors. Conquerors from where, may one not ask? At that point of time, there was no other country in the entire world except India where the above-mentioned gods were worshipped. And since, as has been shown earlier, the Rigveda decidedly belonged to a period prior to 2000 BCE, there is no chronological obstacle in such a hypothesis. In this context, let the reader be told that the very Bogaskoy evidence was given a different twist by certain scholars in the past. While admitting that the gods mentioned in the treaty were Indo-Aryan, they argued that these people were on their way to India. They took this stand because in those days, as per Max Muller's fatwa, the Vedas were considered to have been only as old as 1200 BCE, whereas the Bogaskoy inscription was dated to 14th century BCE. Now that we know fully well that the Vedas are in no case posterior to 2000 BCE, that kind of argument is no longer valid. Again, some scholars have even gone to the extent of saying that this very region was the original home of the Aryans. But this stand, again, is fundamentally incorrect. Why? Because when we say that such and such area was the original home of the people called X, we mean that the local population was by and large that of X and was rooted in the area. But this was not the case with the Bogaskoy region. The local population was different and the Aryans were only the rulers coming from outside, as shown by Burrow. Had they constituted the core or base of the population, they and their language would have lived on, which is not the case. The evidence from Iran is no less revealing. The sacred book of the Zoroastrians, the Avesta, is language-wise very close to but later than the Rigveda. The conspicuous difference is that the Rigvedic Sir becomes Her in the Avesta. Content-wise, the Avestan religion reflects a kind of descent from that of the Rigveda. The concepts of Devas and Asuras get reversed. Nevertheless, there is a genetic relationship between the two. All this shows that the Avestan people were closely related but posterior to the Rigvedic people, a situation which can only be explained by some of the Rigvedic people having moved to the land of the Avesta. There are many pieces of internal evidence in the Avesta itself which testify to this. For example, the Avesta refers to Yoi Hapta Hindu, which is none else than the Sapta Sindhu of the Rigveda. Such a mention of the Rigvedic land of 7 rivers in the Avesta can only mean that the Avestan people continue to cherish the memory of that Rigvedic land, a clear indication of the westward movement of the Rigvedic people. I think this is not good enough evidence for the westward movement of the Rigvedic people. I think this is a very hollow argument, if you ask me. And if people start relying on this, I think they are in danger. It has to be explained with the internal chronology of the Rigveda. I think it's hollow, this argument that B.V. Lal makes. However, it is not unlikely that the section of the Rigvedic people that finally settled down in Persia may have, on the way, sojourned for some time in Afghanistan, during which period the aforesaid linguistic and religious changes would have taken place. It may not be out of place to have a word about the makeup, region of the composition and the date of the Avesta. The Avesta has 2 major divisions, generally referred to as Old and Young. The Old comprises of the Gathas, which are believed to have been composed by Zarathustra himself. It also has a part known as the Yashna Haptan Ghaiti, of which the authorship is not known. The Young Avesta comprises many an items such as religio-legal texts, hymns devoted to certain deities, etc. All available evidence suggests that the Avesta was composed most probably in northeastern Iran. As regards the date, the issue is somewhat controversial. According to one view, it may well go back to circa 14th, 11th century BCE, while another view would bring it down to 8th to 7th century BCE. Again, Talagiri has covered this in detail in the Rigveda and the Avesta, the final evidence. You should study that. While the debate of the exact date of the Avesta would continue until some clinching evidence becomes available, it may interest the reader to know that the region mentioned as Parshva in a Vedic text, Bodhayana Shrota Shutra, to be discussed next, is also mentioned by almost the same name in completely independent document thousands of kilometers west of India. Dated to 835 BCE, it states that King Shalmaneser of Assyria received tributes from 27 kings of Parshuas. That would imply that by the 9th century BCE, the Parshvas had fully established themselves in the region and had evidently reached there several centuries before, maybe by the middle of the 2nd millennium BCE. All this would give legitimacy to the above mentioned early date for both for the Avesta as well as for the migration of Parshvas from India to Iran sometime in 2nd millennium BCE. Finally, the evidence from India itself endorsing an immigration of the Vedic Aryans out of India to 3 contiguous regions towards the west, a Vedic text namely the Bodhayana Shrota Sutra, runs as follows. And he goes on and gives the translation in English, which is, and this is 18.44, the verse. Ayu migrated eastwards. His progeny are the Kuru Panchalas and Kashi Videhas. Amavasu migrated westwards. His progeny are the Gandhari, Parashu, and Aratta. This is the Amavasa migration. Now, the image you're seeing on the main page is a photocopy of the relevant Sanskrit text from the Bodhayana Shrota Sutra. Basically, that's what the image is there. It is the Bodhayana Shrota Sutra's image over there. Yeah, so now let's go further. The details of these migrations are as follows. Aila, Pururavas, and Urvashi had 2 sons named Anu and Amavasu. They migrated respectively to the east and west. The former moving eastwards gave rise to the Kuru Panchala and Kashi Videha dynasties, while the latter moving out to the west went over to Gandhara, Parshu, and Aratta. This bifurcation evidently took place in an area which was between the Kuru region on the east and the Gandhara region on the west. In other words, the scene of the partition lay somewhere in Punjab. The identification of the destinations arrived at by the 2 branches poses no problem. The Kuru Panchala territory lay in the eastern Haryana and western Uttar Pradesh. The Kashi Videhas were settled in the eastern Uttar Pradesh and western Bihar. Of the territories reached by the western branch, Gandhara is straight away identifiable. It is the Kandahar province and the neighboring region of Afghanistan. Likewise, Parshu is identifiable with Persia, which was renamed Iran only as recently as 1935. It is only the location of Aratta that has caused some debate. This place, Aratta or Arta, I don't know, it's a ta or a ta, it's T with 2 dots below, I don't know how it's pronounced, is mentioned not only in the above referred to Vedic text, but also in an epic thousands of kilometers away in the west in Iraq. The epic ascribable to the end of the 3rd millennium BCE mentions that Enmerkar, the king of Uruk, sent a messenger making certain demands to Ensugirana, the ruler of Aratta. We are not concerned here with the other details of the story, but with the identification of Aratta. Some scholars identify it with Ziroft, while some others with Ararat. Fed up with the unending debate, some even go to the extent of calling it unreal and a mere concoction by the composers of the epic. Our failure to arrive at a consensus regarding the identification of the place is no justification for calling it a concoction. You can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Black Cunningham in an internet presentation placed Aratta in the snow-capped mountains that border Mesopotamia. Further in that section of the poem, the ruler of Aratta tells the messenger, the queen of heaven and earth, the goddess of numerous me, holy Inanna, has brought to Aratta the mountain of shining me, I whom she has let bar the entrance of the mountains as if with a great door. You have to give it to the gods, they were fashionable. From the foregoing account, it would appear that Aratta was located close to an opening pass in the mountains, which the ruler Aratta could easily seal. All this enhances the claim of the Ararat region located close to the north of Iraq in a mountainous terrain as being Aratta of the Sumerian epic. Further, if on grounds of phonetic similarity, Gandhara and Parshu of the Vedic text can be identified respectively with Kandahar and Persia, and Susin and Ansan mentioned in the Sumerian epic with Susa and Ansan. What, one may ask, is the reason to discard that very principle in the case of Aratta? It therefore stands to reason that the proposed identification by some scholars of Aratta with Ararat in the Armenian region to the northwest of Persia may be in order. In that case, the Vedic Aryans immigrating out of India traveled via Kandahar and Persia, Iran to Ararat, following south of the Caspian Sea route. I just want to make a point here that just because they sound similar does not mean that they are similar every time. Linguistics is not that simplified. Again, I think this was a very dangerous claim. Linguistic similarity and many other things are based on far deeper points. Just saying. I think again, what happens is you can listen to this and just take it on word face value. That should not be done. And since from Ararat to Turkey is just a next door affair, the immigration of the Vedic Aryans into Turkey becomes self-explained. Further, as there are enough dated records on the Turkey side, the immigration from India is easily assignable to the first half of the second millennium BCE. Rushal, now you can make your point of the Brodayana Shrotashotras. What were you trying to say in that comment?
You already made the point. I was just saying that this same text is used by Witzel and others to say that it's actually Aryan. It proves Aryan invasion, west to east migration into India. Yeah, you already made that point well. So I was just specifically pointing to this text to make that.
Yeah. So that's why. Sorry. Please go ahead.
No, I was saying the only thing that I don't understand is that Gandhar is specifically called out. So if it's mentioned that going west into Gandhar is there, then it doesn't exactly match what Witzel and others are trying to claim. That's kind of I don't know, just sticks out as a evidence that doesn't fit into that. But yeah, I mean, people will pick whatever, right? So that origin. So my point was, this is why the hard evidence, the hard sciences becomes important. And in the last decade, the work we've done, going down to try and gather some more evidence, is going to help to some extent. Now, at the end of the day, if the linguistics people are stuck in their head on the linguistic, doesn't matter what you find, that was a different civilization and this is a different civilization, then I mean, that's why like you have to draw an overall narrative that comes in from multiple angles.
Yeah, I agree.
And the principles of linguistics themselves are sort of reinvented to suit the evidence, right? So all this time, it was, previous to the Bogaskoy inscription, quite honestly, the whole idea was that all of this Aryan language initially arose somewhere in either Eastern Europe or the Caucasus or somewhere like that, and then came to India. Like Lal actually covers this in his first chapter. But once they found the Bogaskoy, they ran into big trouble because suddenly the Bogaskoy inscription is about 1380, right, BCE, because you can actually carbon date a piece of rock. So that's when they started trying to queer the pitch by inventing a Proto-Indo-European language. It's almost around the same time. They started saying, okay, here was this language that was, so because it suddenly becomes much more difficult to prove that it came directionally from one end to the other end. 1380 is much too late for the Bogaskoy inscription to be an ancestor of the Rigveda, even for these guys. Because even, if it was still in Turkey in 1380, there's no way it could have reached India and then become composed into the Rigveda as a brand new language by these invading Aryans by 1200. It's just a very short time. So suddenly they had to invent that this is not father and son between Turkey and India. They are cousins, or they are sibling languages. And the father is suddenly identified with this mysterious thing called Proto-Indo-European, which is supposed to have been spoken, but is not spoken anymore. And nobody knows who spoke it, and nobody knows what it sounded like. But they start reconstructing it, from all kinds of nonsense words. And these days in linguistics, it's sort of become this assumed dogma that this Proto-Indo-European existed. So when you hear this term PIE, I think it's very important to understand that there is absolutely no evidence of such a language as PIE. There is no claim as to which part of the word PIE originated in or where it was spoken, because there is no trace of it today, except in all its daughter languages or, the languages that it put out, according to the PIE theory.
No, I think that is inaccurate and unfair, Karthik. I think then have you read David Anthony's work?
No. Which one? Which one? By Horse and the Wheel?
Yes. I think there is a very good case for the Proto-Indo-European. The hypothesis of the Proto-Indo-European is absolutely airtight. There is a Proto-Indo-European. The only question is, where did it originate? It has been the entire dictionary has been created. I think,
It's
Rushal, have you read the horse, the wheel, and the language?
no, it's been created. It's been created through synthesis, through reverse engineering existing languages. There is no evidence that such a language, even in David Anthony's work, there's no evidence that such a language was actually
Yeah,
spoken.
but that
I
argument
can find you
itself is
text in
flawed.
right? I
That
can find you
argument is
text in
not correct.
Sanskrit.
No, no, but that argument is not correct, because the Proto-Indo-European was at a time spoken at a time when there was no script.
I mean, that means by itself it is fanciful. That means by itself it's a construct. There is no, if there is no primary evidence for a language's existence, then it is by definition a surmised language. No?
Sorry, sorry.
No.
So, Karthik, the same question that you are asking, exactly those questions are addressed in that book, right, Kushal?
Yes.
Exactly this. So that is a very nice book. So when we discuss, I think we will come out with these answers.
I think the Proto-Indo-European hypothesis is airtight. I think the evidence David Anthony presents in his book is airtight. This is the crux of the entire Aryan invasion theory. They are stuck on the 1500 BCE thing. They are actually, वो Max Muller सत्यानाश करके चले गया सारा. They are all stuck on the 1500 BCE thing, and now they have this step migration into India. Now तो they are stuck even more, because now तो अभी कैसे हो गया, इज्जत का सवाल आ गया है. It is like हमारी इज्जत का सवाल है, we have to do it. So this is the problem. So the Proto-Indo-European hypothesis has nothing wrong in it. It is a airtight hypothesis, and Subhash Kak's objections to it have no meaning whatsoever. And I'm using the name again. I'm telling you, Subhash Kak might be accurate in many things, but his objection to the Proto-Indo-European is based on flawed scholarship. And I have read his arguments against Proto-Indo-European. I would recommend you should read. He selectively quotes here and there, and he tries to make it, that there is no such thing as Proto-Indo-European. It is absolutely flawed. Because if there is no such thing as Proto-Indo-European, then there is no such thing as any movement from here to there or here, there to here. Then how do you connect these languages? Then how did these languages come up? Because then you have to go in and understand the evolution of language. It's a scientific issue. It's not just anything else. How does language come up? Then you have to go in and read Chomsky. Then you have to go and read Steven Pinker. These are serious scientific issues. And this is the problem with Subhash Kak. I don't think so he's read Chomsky or he's read Steven Pinker. Like how language works. Steven Pinker's book is a wonderful narration of how languages are developed, or how grammar came up. Right? There is a Chomskyan grammar, right? Chomsky has come up with an argument. You can forget about Noam Chomsky and his views on American foreign policy, but the point is, the man is a bloody genius. His work on these fields is fantastic. And I think Proto-Indo-European hypothesis is pretty strong. But anyway, so Vrushal, you have any view, or Devayan, or anybody else has a view? Manasa, please share your views right now, because I have kind of run out of views. If anybody else has a view, please make your point right now.
So we've discussed it before. I think the horse, the wheel, and the language, that book shows. I mean, he summarizes it well. The only thing is, when he gets to that point, if you look at the reference, because he's not a linguist himself, David B. Anthony, you go to the reference and he says, okay, this is everything I'm getting is from Michael Witzel. And he even has a motherhood statement saying, okay, if there's any errors, it's not because of Witzel, it's because of me, because there must have been some kind of agreement saying, because at that time, simultaneously, there was a big pushback from OIT scholars at that time. And then when you look at Witzel, if you were actually to make a citation loop of the whole where 1500 BC comes, it'll be like a triangle that starts with Max Muller. And each person, regardless of what he said, Max Muller, each person in that pyramid scheme has made, has kind of offered their flowers to Max Muller rather than criticizing him, right? So I wouldn't give free pass to anybody after Max Muller, because everybody's kind of just said, okay, without any independent evidence. So yeah, I think you already. I have nothing else on that.
Okay, I think I should clarify something. I mean, I have no doubt that there was some ancestral language that we cannot probably localize. So I mean, if you want to call that Proto-Indo-European, go ahead. But I'm talking about Proto-Indo-European as a construct that was supposedly spoken in the Black and Caspian Sea area, which is what David Anthony refers to it as being.
Oh
There's
no,
no
it
evidence
was
that it was
spoken. It was
from
spoken in
there.
India.
Yeah, my argument is that there's no basis for saying that it came from there.
Oh no
From
no
the
no
Black
no.
Caspian
That's
Sea.
even I agree with you. My point is there was a Proto-Indo-European. That
Naturally, there was. I mean,
Proto-Indo-European was spoken in India.
that was the ancestral language. So that the language of the Rigveda is Proto-Indo-European, or
No,
is the first stage
Proto-Indo-European is
of
not the
PIE.
language of the Rigveda. That's not Proto-Indo-European.
It is what became that first before it became any of the other languages.
Now that is very
Proto-Indo-European.
hard to say. That is very hard to say because I don't know how and what the journey of the Proto-Indo-European is and how Proto-Indo-European eventually developed. I'm not a linguist, but I think even Conrad Elst has written in detail about this. So Conrad Elst does not say the Rigvedic Sanskrit is the Proto-Indo-European. Okay, Anita has asked a question. Anita says, I'm a bit confused. Can you clarify the chronology of PIE with Rigveda? Well, Anita, the logic is very simple. So what these people say is that Proto-Indo-Europe there. So what happens was that I think first time it was a French linguistic scholar or French scholar who found similarities between Sanskrit and other languages. And then obviously later on, William Jones and all these people started finding that these European languages and Sanskrit have very similar words, right? Bhratar, brother, for example. I'm just giving you an example. Night, Nakt. These are words which are very similar. So then they were like, oh, these languages are similar. Then they came up with the rationale that these languages are interrelated, and they came up with the idea of language families, that these are all one language family. Then if they are all one language family, then they are obviously originated from one common language. And then that common language must have originated in one part. And that one part, then the debate is not whether Proto-Indo-European is real or not. The debate is whether Proto-Indo-European originated in Europe, or the debate is whether Proto-Indo-European originated in India. Now, what was the gap between Mandala 6, which is the earliest Mandala, right? The language of Mandala 6, and what is the language of Proto-Indo-European, and what is the gap in terms of years between them? Nobody knows that. Nobody knows that because we just don't have the evidence, because language was spoken at that time. There was no script. So we don't know how many years does the language take to evolve. We can take guesses. But we cannot, like Karthik was saying, that Vedic Sanskrit was Proto-Indo-European. We cannot make that assessment, and we cannot make that claim. In my view, there is no claim like that, because there is no hard evidence that it is Proto-Indo-European, because other languages have not come out of Vedic Sanskrit.
I'd say that this is evidence if you say that, like, the earliest books of the Rig Veda, as Tadagiri himself says, use the word Nakt, whereas the later books use the word Ratri. What is that if not evolution, right? And it's evolution, and from the early point of the evolution, the early branching point of the evolution, where you're saying Nakt is what's been disseminated to the other languages of the Proto-Indo-European family. So that kind of shows me that it's going from a state which was more kind of diffuse and more similar to Proto-Indo-European to a more refined form in the later books of the Rig Veda itself.
I agree with you, but Vedic Sanskrit is not Proto-Indo-European.
There's not one Vedic Sanskrit anyway. I mean, as Tadagiri shows, it's an evolving language from early.
The Vedic Sanskrit of Mandala 6 is not Proto-Indo-European. I have gone back to the oldest book now. The Vedic Sanskrit mentioned in Mandala 6, Tadagiri does not say it is Proto-Indo-European.
Okay, then I have this one question. Like, at what point do we say that it does become Proto-Indo-European? Is there some like,
the answer to that is we don't know.
In time where we say, okay, from so and so BCE, it stopped being Proto-Indo-European and then became.
That's a very good question, to which nobody has the answer. But just because we don't have the answer, we cannot claim that Mandala 6 is Proto-Indo-European.
I'll tell you the hypothesis that David B. Anthony has, which is, he says, is between the heart of the I'm quoting now, the heart of the Proto-Indo-European period probably fell between 4000 and 3000 BCE, with an
Yeah.
early phase that might go back to 4500 BCE and a late phase that ended by 2500 BCE. Now,
This is
his dates
before he
may-
gives that entire dictionary, na, Rushal?
correct.
Yeah, I didn't want to quote that part, but yeah, he gives a date and he basically goes down and gives the entire dictionary of names that they derived from the Proto-Indo-European, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting because that almost directly parallels like your, BB Lal's phase. I mean, stages of the development of your ISVC, right? I mean, would you say you started 4500 BCE and then end up at like 2500 BCE? So from phase 1 to the mature phase. I'm not saying that means it's the same place, but I mean, if that chronology is what's being established,
Yeah.
it
So-
almost exactly follows the
So
chronology of civilization in ISVC.
see, here's my thing. If we say Vedic Sanskrit is Proto-Indo-European, we might run into multiple problems.
Nobody should make that claim, but I would say that Vedic Sanskrit belongs. I mean, Vedic Sanskrit is the
It's
first
the
son.
closest to Proto-Indo-European. That
Yeah,
I'm willing
the
to
first child of Proto-Indo-European.
I don't know if it's the first child also because they
Or
have
the first
found,
surviving child. It might have,
So,
had
see,
more than died out.
Brushal, now that you have opened Anthony's book, don't you remember he had shown some languages which were far closer to Proto-Indo-European? It was not Vedic Sanskrit, right? What were the languages? I forgot the name. Yeah.
Proto-Uralic or Anatolian?
Yeah. I think it was Tocharian, right?
Anatolian is the first child, right?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think so.
Earliest. I think.
Tocharian. Let me see if I can find it. But
I'm telling you,
Where
it
he
is a very
explains-
problematic claim. We cannot challenge the linguists on that. The linguists are sound in that. The only mess up they make is they place the homeland in South Russia. That is where the issue is, because they place the homeland in South Russia and they twist the entire date of the Rigveda to suit this one phase when there is the entering of the steppe DNA in India. And they club it all together.
Placing the homeland in South Russia is a direct function of saying that the earliest form of Proto-Indo-European is Uralic. I mean, like I'm going to have to go through this, but I'm having serious doubts about any of these claims that David Anthony's making.
No, so the
I mean,
closest
honestly,
Proto-Indo-European is Anatolian and then Tocharian.
Tocharian is not even spoken anymore. But like, okay, if you talk about Anatolian and Uralic, I mean, these are both sort of. I mean, looking at the same map on, where BB Lal has described Ararat and Bogaskoy. I mean, it's basically starts at that end.
Yeah.
And I'd like to know on what basis is he claiming that these languages that aren't spoken anymore started there? That in what basis is he assigning a relative chronology to this is the first child of that? This
Okay,
is the
I
second
think
child of
you're
that. I mean,
confusing two issues. I think you're confusing two issues.
No. I have deep skepticism of anything that claims to be a science, but then applies its own rules internally and to devise a rubric that impinges on fields of science that are outside its own. Fine, you can say that linguistics has its own theory which is internally consistent, but when they start using when they start making claims that are based entirely on the internal consistency and internal argumentation of linguistic theory and start opposing those claims to other fields of work like history and archaeology and genetics, as you mentioned, that's hugely problematic. And I think that's when really some of these things have to be called into question in the first place. I mean, for example, like, Maxwell's electromagnetic theory was perfectly sound within itself. Okay, Newtonian classical physics is completely sound within itself, within its own realm of observation and its own set of assumptions. Everything within it is consistent. But that doesn't mean that special relativity and general relativity don't apply to it, don't apply to the universe.
Yeah, but if you're making the claim that it is not wrong, it is not right, then the burden of evidence is on you. They have given their evidence, right?
Fair enough. But from where is that evidence coming now? Is it coming
that
from?
You have to read the book, right?
Yeah, certainly. So I think this is actually worth a read. This is actually worth a read to see if there's anything in it other than the rules and regulations of linguistics itself.
No, the Proto-Indo-European hypothesis is based on the rules set up by linguists, and there is a wide-ranging agreement. Other than a few scholars here and then, I think Nicholas Kazanas is one of them. He has a problem with that. I don't consider Subhash Kak to be a linguist, but the people who understand linguistics, like Konrad Elst, he completely agrees with the Proto-Indo-European hypothesis. There are mostly all known linguists who are in agreement with this, and if somebody has a problem with that, the burden of proof is on them. The Proto-Indo-European hypothesis is absolutely sound. Even from a common casual first principle based assumptions, when you find similarities in languages which go from all the way from Haryana to all the way to South Russia, which is such a huge freaking home.
You're making a big leap there, Kushal. You're saying, okay, from first principle, you can say that they're related. But from first principle, you can definitely not say that Uralic or, non-existent Anatolian or Tocharian is the first child of that. No, for that, you have to build a big house of cards on top of the first principles and give it, something that sounds like internal consistency.
Yeah, but
and then you come up with a construct like that. No?
That's a linguistic argument, and that's what the linguists have built, that why Anatolian and Tocharian are closer to the Proto-Indo-European, that they have built the dictionary of Proto-Indo-European going back through linguistic methods. And that's where they come up with the argument that
it sounds like an utterly circular argument. No, I mean, like, I'm going to build up a dictionary of Proto-Indo-European.
Your problem is you're defensive to the idea that because they have claimed I don't trust them, so I don't like this conclusion. The problem is that they were not thinking that I see, you are sensitive to the idea that how can theirs be closer to Proto-Indo-European?
No, it's fine. If it is, it is. Okay, I mean, if it is actually, if there is an actual reason, if somebody can show me a tablet from Bogaskoi that dates back to 6000 BCE, and my God, that is like something that is like the earliest known example of an actual Proto-Indo-European language, then I'll have to revise my opinions. I don't mind. But based on arguments that are simply like theories within theories or assumptions within assumptions, and then you start. See, here's my problem with it. You build a dictionary, okay, of Proto-Indo-European based on what? You build it using certain rules of linguistics that are invented by linguists to understand evolution of language. You build this, okay, based on taking words from existing languages and working backwards, right? Fair enough, all fair enough. Let's say, like you've taken all these existing languages. I mean, you take Greek and, Farsi and this and that, and you work backwards and you say, okay, Tocharian and Anatolian and this and that. You work backwards a little more and you say, okay, TK, like finally we'll come to a Proto-Indo-European. We made it. But then to start from there and start assigning chronologies working forward, it's a completely circular argument. You've gone back to Proto-Indo-European using existing things, going backwards in time and making more and more assumptions and presumptions as you do it based on your own internal rules. But then to work back from there and say, okay, wahan se, these are the things that came first, and then those other things came from that, is by definition, it's the very definition of a circular argument. You've gone back, now you're taking U-turn and you're coming forward.
So Mayuresh has made a good point. I was going to make the same point, that Proto-Indo-European is basically going from the 5-vowel system of Greek and Latin to 3-vowel system of Indo-Iranian. Also, you have to understand, Karthik, that at the end of the day, if that is your argument, then that should apply equally to Proto-Indo-European being Vedic Sanskrit, being close to Vedic Sanskrit also.
Okay. I'll say so. I mean,
and if that's the case, then we don't know what anything is. At the point,
we don't know what anything is based on linguistics alone. I have deep skepticism of not of linguistics per se.
You're actually making the Subhash Kak argument right now.
No. I have deep skepticism of the ability of any one branch of science, and I will admit this for genetics, which is my branch of science. I have deep skepticism of any one branch of science alone, especially, in terms of it uses its own principles to prove its own next lemmas, and then it uses its own principles from those lemmas to prove its next conclusions, and so on and so on.
No, but we have found Anatolian and Tocharian. No, but we have found tablets with Anatolian and Tocharian, haven't we? I think even David Anthony mentions that. If I'll have to check and remember, I don't remember.
Like and Luwian and all. I think
they have been clearly mentioned. I mean, all these things are mentioned in the book.
ठीक है, पढ़ूंगा. I'll read it, but I'll tell you this. Just as my principle is skepticism. It's total skepticism, especially of any field which starts from actual evidence, draws conclusions based on that evidence, makes assumptions based on that, draws another set of conclusions from that, and then comes back and starts making claims about the evidence that it started with in the first place.
Yeah, but that's a very flawed argument, because you're making assumptions on behalf of them without reading them. I think that's not scientific. All these arguments can be made only after you read the entire work of David Anthony and the people he cites.
It's true. That's true. And I will say
Then
this too.
the
But I
argument
will say this
stands
too.
no
But,
ground.
knowing how a science and its internal and something that's based on reasoning that's based entirely on its internal assumptions can be abused to make all sorts of strange claims in the field of genetics.
That's a fair claim.
That is my approach to something like
that's
that.
okay. That's okay. That's a
like
fair
linguistics
claim.
and events.
That's a fair claim if they
Yeah.
don't cite the evidence. But if they have cited the evidence, that's not a fair claim.
Again, it comes to quality of evidence. I mean, if you look at the kind of evidence, you look at the kind of, like, Narasimhan, Vagish Narasimhan, like, you can say that is evidence. I mean, I'm going to call it data. I'm not going to call it evidence until I'm convinced that it means anything based on something other than what you already decided internally per the rules and of your own linguistics that it means.
Again, you're making all these claims without having read the book, without having read any primary literature that they cite, without your assumptions itself are biased. You have to admit to that. If you're
I'm biased in favor of skepticism. I'm happy to.
Yeah, so that's the
I'm
point,
biased
right?
in favor of skepticism.
So that's also dogmatic, right? How can you be skeptical about something without reading it?
My approach to anything is skeptical, which means it's the antithesis
Your
of
approach to anything, you have to be skeptical to things you read. If you have not read it, you just say you don't know, right? You can't be skeptical to something you don't know about.
No, but you can read something like certain people would read the Bible, or you can read something with an air of skepticism, right? Like, how do you read something?
You read the Bible. The key word there was read. There is no reading here.
I know. I'm saying I will read David Anthony, but
so after you read David Anthony and you make these arguments based on citations that he's used and checking his bibliography and checking his references, then
I know, but everything that I read in there, if I look at his bibliography and it's more and more like principles of linguistics, I'm like getting, I don't know, something smells there. Let's see.
I think that's your bias. That's my answer, because I've read all this work over the years, and I have read this again and again. So when I
know, and you read it and you internalize what they say about things, no?
I've read it and have checked their things. I mean, it is what it is.
Like,
here's the answer. Hear me out.
Jagannath and I, are like each other's witness. Like, yesterday did you and we're each telling our wives.
Karthik, you're not getting my point. Again, Karthik, I don't want to get into this argument any further. Let's just end it here. I'm very sorry to say this, but I have read it. The point is, I have read it. Keyword, read. You're arguing with me without reading it.
No, I'll read it, but I'm just saying that
So why don't we have this discussion after you read it?
I think having a skeptical approach is a healthy way to approach something.
Yeah, but having a skeptical approach to something you've read. You should be agnostic to something you have not read. You should be skeptical to something after you read it. The epistemic humility demands that I don't know what the person's claim are. I'll read and then form my opinion. Until then, I don't know. That should be the point. The point should not be that I am skeptical of everything on a whole. I mean, I'm skeptical of religion, right? But until I did not read religion, I would not make the claim about religion. The key to understanding things is, how do you build skepticism?
Yeah, and I'm skeptical of anything that isn't hard science, quite honestly. Yeah. I'm skeptical of most things that aren't hard sciences, like things that claim like social sciences.
Even I am. I agree with you. Linguistics is not a hard science. I agree with you. But what I'm trying to say is, David Anthony does not just rely on the linguistics. He says there is an entire section in the book that shares archaeological evidence.
Okay, let's see.
The book is 500 pages, and it is the most robust book available out there. I mean, I'm sorry to say, but I will be very honest here. You're wrong. You're wrong because you've not read it. See, if you can reject something, then you can point out to me on page number 6, so and so point.
I,
Then I'll respect it.
I'm saying that I haven't, that I'm approaching it with skepticism. Have I said I reject it? No. I
You
said that I
can't be
approach.
skeptical to something that you don't know. It's a philosophical problem. I can't be skeptical to something that I don't know.
I can definitely approach. I mean, Koshal, philosophics. I mean, who are the skeptics in Greece?
The skeptics were sophists. They were called sophists for a reason, because they were skeptic for the heck of being skeptical.
So what's wrong
They
with
were called sophists. It was called sophistry.
Sophistry is making excuses for things. Sophistry is trying to find justifications.
So I'll tell you what, the greatest skeptic in the world today is Michael Shermer. He runs a magazine called Skeptic Magazine. What does Skeptic Magazine do? It is not skeptical of claims it doesn't read. It becomes skeptical of things after it reads them. I'm giving you the example of the most famous magazine ever, Skeptic Magazine.
Right.
All I'm saying is you should become skeptical of things after you read them. I am with you on linguistics. Even I think linguistics is not a complete method. It has a lot of holes individually. But what I am saying is David Anthony does not base the argument purely on linguistics. So that's all I'm telling you. You cannot base your criticism on something without reading that. It's like me. I don't understand anything about quantum mechanics, but I'm saying I'm skeptical of quantum mechanics. I can't even explain it. That's my point. I should be in a position to explain it, right? If somebody says, okay, you're skeptical of quantum mechanics, tell me what quantum mechanics is. Can I give that answer? I can't. How can I be skeptical of that? So you have to understand what I'm trying to say.
Well, there's definitely differences when we're talking about a hard science and something that's a social science, right? I mean,
I totally grant you that. But once again, I'm repeating. If you would have read the book, you would have not made this point. That's my whole point. If you read the book and you spend the time and reading the archaeological evidence, reading the linguistic evidence, and you click both of them parallelly, that way we should be skeptical of what Talagiri says also, if we remove the archaeology from that.
By all
right? Yes. But what Talagiri claims is totally parallel to the archaeology. Similarly, what David Anthony claims in the case of the origin of the Proto-Indo-European and its closest to certain languages is clearly there when the evidence is there in the archaeology. Where each and every one of these people make the mistake is that there is no evidence that Proto-Indo-European originated in point A or point B. That's where the problem is. The most likely evidence, even if let's be very honest, is there any tablet of Proto-Indo-European discovered in India? No. Is there any tablet of Proto-Indo-European discovered in India? Does anybody know, anybody who is there on the live chat or watching this live? Does anybody know any Proto-Indo-European tablet discovered in India? No, right? Then how do we know Proto-Indo-European originated in India? We make this estimate based on the assumption of reading the Rigveda, and we understand the evidence that the Rigveda teaches us this chronology. The most likely place, then we hypothesize from that point, and then we go to point 2, is that the Proto-Indo-European has to originate here because it seems like these people moved from east to west. That's what I'm trying to say. So the point of how can they prove that there is a Proto-Indo? Well, how can you prove that the Proto-Indo-European was in India? Then your argument should be, I don't believe in the Proto-Indo-European hypothesis. I'm willing to accept that argument. Then your argument should be, I don't know.
No. There's a middle ground between that, which is that I can believe that there was an ancestral language of some kind. I don't know that it necessarily conforms to the kind of the specific construct of Proto-Indo-European, the specific construct with its dictionary and this and that David Anthony and all have come up with. I don't know that it does that. I don't necessarily accept that it does.
Yeah, but if you don't want to accept it, nobody needs to force you to accept it. But the point is that if somebody was in a linguistic conference and they say, I don't accept it, the only thing they'll say, Steelman, my argument, give me your argument. That you have to do, right?
Fair enough,
So
but
you cannot, again, get it. You cannot reject something without
no.
getting
He's saying, like, look. I mean, I'm even looking at it right now. He's talking about how to reconstruct a dead language, which means that he has a certain approach. Like that linguistics takes a certain approach to to reconstructing a language from existing languages.
Mhm.
I'll have to evaluate what that is for myself and see if it makes
Yeah.
sense internally.
So then you have to be a Proto-Indo-European skeptic.
I can
Sanjay,
be. I don't necessarily have to be a skeptic. No. I disavow labels like that because I don't necessarily have to be a skeptic of the very idea that a Proto-Indo-European languages
fair
may have
enough.
existed, not done
Then you have to come up
but I
with a
can be skeptical.
Proto-Indo-European linguistic dictionary yourself. Then people will take it seriously.
Wait a second. So what you're saying is that unless I propose an alternative, I have to accept whatever is there. That means unless you tell me what God is, you have to accept the God of the Bible. That's basically what you're saying.
All I'm saying is you cannot be skeptical of something you don't know. So first know it, then propose the holes in it, and then read. Maybe there are answers to the holes that you point out.
Maybe, but it's not incumbent on me to provide all the answers for me to otherwise say. Otherwise, I have to accept whatever David Anthony says.
You can be skeptical of all. Like there are 9/11 skeptics too, right? But the point is, to be skeptical of something, we need to know what the claim is. You should know the claim first.
Nobody's arguing that point.
Yeah.
Nobody's arguing that there's a need to read and deconstruct on Anthony.
Read David Anthony's book.
Nobody's arguing that point. Okay.
Yeah. So you should read David Anthony's book and then you should come up with the arguments. That's all I'm saying. You cannot be skeptical of something it's actually not the right way to approach a subject in life. In my view, I say there are many questions people ask me. I say I don't know. I don't say I'm skeptical. I say I don't know. I'm ignorant.
The entire foundation of clinical trials is based on skepticism, right? I mean, like it's based on saying, okay, you take a drug, you prove that it works in monkeys, but no, until you show me the evidence that it works in humans, I'm going to be skeptical of that. Then you prove that it works in a phase 2 trial of a few hundred humans. You say, no, until you show it to that it works in thousands of people with the disease in a phase 3 clinical trial, I'm not going to give you a license to sell it. It's, like that's what I mean by skepticism. Like you have to keep raising the standards of evidence for something.
Absolutely agree with you. I think linguistics is not an absolute method. I'm willing to concede that myself. My point is, still I have to read it, right? I am willing to concede linguistics.
That's not even in contention. Of course, one has to read it.
But
just the way that I would approach, scientific literature on a new drug based on that's what I mean by skepticism. Is like, you show me evidence that it works in monkeys, fine. I'm still not going to say that this is a treatment for cancer.
Agreed. So we have to come up with our own Proto-Indo-European hypothesis. It's very simple. It's very simple. We can. It's at the end of the day, if this language had a common ancestor, then I am convinced by the arguments provided by David Anthony, Conrad Elst. I am convinced by it.
Okay.
So somebody says, "What is your evidence?" I'll point them out to this evidence. Now, if somebody is not convinced by it, it's their job to show me the evidence.
Okay, can you quickly point out which is the work of Conrad Elst that you're speaking about in this particular case?
Conrad Elst, you can read so many blogs of Conrad Elst where he's spoken about why the Proto-Indo-European hypothesis is sound.
Okay.
There are so many.
I was wondering if there was an actual book. I mean, I've read quite a bit of Wells' work on on politics and so on, but I have not come across.
Conrad Elst is primarily a linguist. He's an Indologist specialization in linguistics. So, I mean, you can go and read Conrad Elst. He's also convinced with the efficacy of the Proto-Indo-European hypothesis. He's pretty much convinced by it. He just says the Proto-Indo-European did not originate in Europe. He says it originated in India. That's his argument.
Yeah.
That's Conrad Elst's argument, not my argument. And when I read it, it made sense to me. In fact, Conrad Elst had even written, if I remember correctly, He had even criticized Subhash Kak's hypothesis. That's what I'm trying to say. So you can read them. Don't read David Anthony. Read Conrad Ernst.
No, I will read David Anthony. At this point, my curiosity is piqued to see what this is all about. Like, but yeah,
Even
fair enough. I want to know what
even Pellegrini has written a blog, I think, on Proto-Indo-European.
Okay.
Even Talagiri has written on it. Talagiri is also absolutely convinced by the Proto-Indo-European hypothesis, by the way. He does not doubt what the linguistic people in the Indology departments are claiming. He does not doubt that either. He just says, you guys are wrong in pointing the Proto-Indo-European homeland in South Russia or in Anatolia. There are the Kurgan hypothesis and the Anatolian hypothesis. That's what Talagiri, Conrad Ernst object to. That's their only objection. They're like, it has to be India because the internal chronology of the Rigveda is like this. That's their argument. And the other side says the date of the Rigveda is squeezed to 1500 BCE and it goes the other way. That's what I'm trying to say. So there is nobody other than Subhash Kak that I have read in this entire field who doubts the Proto-Indo-European hypothesis. Or maybe Nicholas Kazanas, if I remember correctly. There are two people who doubt this. There is hardly anybody who doubts this. Now, it could
again, when we're saying this or the Proto-Indo-European hypothesis, I think we have to be careful what we're defining. That there was at some point an ancestral language to all the languages. Is that it?
Guys, I think we have to park this because we've been going for a while. So I think Karthik, you have to read I think everybody should read. My personal recommendation is read the book because, if nothing else, it's an excellent book on archaeology. Lots of good tidbits. So after you read it, you can break it down into different elements, some that deal with linguistics and other that deal with general hard sciences. And then there's this very specific discussion we can have about around linguistics as a fulcrum on the date. Then what does that tell us? And then we can have a more discussion based on that. But otherwise, we will just keep going into philosophy.
I agree.
Another thing is that this discussion with two of you has now exceeded the length of the main book discussion. So totally defeating, Kushal's point, saying that today's video will be a small video, it will give me through the rest.
Yeah.
The main video was 40 minutes, this one is 42 minutes with Kushal speaking more.
What has happened has happened. I can't take it back.
Okay. All right. We should have parked it for the post video, but anyway, sorry. I didn't want to get into a big thing about it now, but
it's okay. All right. Chalo, I'll see you guys next week. Take care. Namaste. Bye-bye.